everybody, and welcome to the Magical Learning Podcast for this week. My name's Jez, and I'm your host, and I'm here to make your learning today a little magical. Magical Learning's been running successfully as a business for over 20 years and partnering with global thought leaders like John Mattone and Robin Sharma. So if you want to learn, if you want to have a bit of fun, and you want to make your learning a little magical, then join us today. Today, we're going to be having an amazing conversation, and we'll be getting into how fun, how magical, and how interesting it'll be, and how business-related it'll be as well. I haven't even mentioned that part. It is going to be a business-related podcast as well. We're going to tie it all together, but before I can do that for anybody, let's check in on the team and see how they're going. So, Director of Learning Danette, you are in a new, undisclosed location. Where are you actually recording out of, and what's going on?
So, Jez, today I'm in Perth. I flew in last night, flying out tonight, so it's a quick trip, speaking in front of a group of about 450 people about the future of business partnering. So that will be a fun 90-minute session at 1:30 Perth time this afternoon. So super excited. Always love to travel, as you well know. So thanks, Jez.
That's all right. And if people are really excited and they live in Perth and they want to go see you, the time for that has unfortunately passed, as this is being released weeks later. But but stay in tune with our social medias to see where you can catch Danette or Grahame at the next event. So yes, but anyway, Danette, so by the time you're listening to this, it's already gone through and it's already been a massive success, I'm sure. So thanks for joining us, Danette. Grahame, our CEO, how are you going?
Apparently I'm going very, very silently, Jez. I'm good. Thanks for asking. It's been a big week. It's been a cool week in this part of the world, but excited to make it to Friday and probably a little bit more excited about the fact that there's only 3 more sleeps until Monday. It's a good way to go into the weekend, realising that eventually this too shall pass and we can be happy again.
Yes, and the beauty of that, Grahame, is that this is being released on a Monday, so people will be able to use your love of a weekend as an encouragement for their own Friday upcoming.
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Well, great to have you on. And Al, how are you going? How's things?
I'm going great, Jets. My very adventurous daughter Annabelle has talked me into going to China over the last week, and we've had some really different experiences and really surprised to see how China is a really lovely place with lots of friendly people, and we had lots of fun.
Wow. So wait, you just came back?
We did, got back a couple of days ago and caught up on some sleep.
Tell us a little bit about the trip. Where'd you go? I'm actually fascinated. I didn't know this trip was on the card, so give us a little rundown.
We flew into Shanghai and then off to Beijing, back to Shanghai and then out to a couple of cities around there. Like it was an organised bus trip with Tripadeal, and I was a bit concerned the price was really, really cheap. I was not expecting much, but all the places we stayed were fantastic. The bus was really comfortable and just a great group of people on the bus, which made it so much fun.
Well, how about that, Al? That's fantastic to hear, and glad to have you back. And glad to hear potentially some insights you may have gleaned from your trip in today's episode.
Absolutely, Jens.
Well, great. So for people that haven't listened to our podcast before, it's all about learning, it's all about having fun, but we've kind of made our own version of a way to tackle business topics in a way that's fun, in a way that sort of brings new insights, and in a way that largely prevents us from running into legal risk with businesses that we don't want to name, because we will be taking this to a fantastical realm. So we're going to be looking at business problems in a fantastical realm. The reason we're doing that is because business problems exist cross-dimensionally, cross-domains. So business problems can exist no matter what your business is, and some of them are quite common. So why not have a bit of fun with it, set in a fantastic place, and tackle a real business problem, putting all our heads together. Now, that may sound like a lot, but guess what? That's not even all of it, because we're going to be having another discussion that is totally unrelated, and that is going to be on today's topic. Now, you might go, Jez, why are we going to be doing that as well? Well, my goal with this is that we should be able to see some interesting patterns that connect all of this together. And that's the fun of our brain, is putting our brains together, where some of us may just leave some information and the others may put it together, or we may not put it together today. We'll see how we go. We'll just see how much our brains are switched on, how much coffee we've had, and how ready we are to go. So there we go. Graham's holding up his Tim Hortons cup. He's locked and loaded. He's got the professional fuel. So that's great. So today's topic that we're actually going to be talking about is a fact that blew your mind. But before we get to our business problem, so that's what we're all going to be bringing something today and sort of chatting a little bit about everybody's different facts that blew their mind. But before we get there, does anybody have a fantastical setting that we could potentially make the universe of this business exist?
And I'm going to throw this to Al and Grahame because I've picked the last two. So I reckon let's hand over to someone else.
My mind's gone to China on a bus trip.
I mean, we could play off that. I don't know how I don't want to specifically do China because I feel like it's too real of an example, but let's play with that, Al. The most famous work that I can think of that's set in China is Kung Fu Panda. I don't know if people are aware of that one, and I can just quickly, for people that haven't really followed that movie or haven't watched it or anything, I can quickly give everybody the cliff notes so we can kind of work out what's going on. So Kung Fu Panda is a bit of an ugly duckling type story where a panda is literally adopted by ducks to work in a dumpling shop, and he of course is much bigger, requires much more fuel than a duck, and so he's kind of a bit like a bull in a china shop. He is then the sort of feature of the town is this local monastery that features a lot of kung fu, and there's sort of they utilize the elements of kung fu to sort of personify these different things. So in kung fu, there's the sort of snake stance or the tiger stance, and they've actually made them into a snake, a cricket, a tiger, and all these different things. So they're all the different masters of the Kung Fu. And basically what we learn is that Po, who is Jack Black, who is the Kung Fu Panda, his skill is actually a very unique blend of things, and it utilizes his skills in a way that the others, where their strengths are more in agility, his strength is in defense, rebounding, because he's got a larger stomach, and also his ability to bounce, and his strength gained from his larger size. So that's kind of to give a broad summary. So today, I think given all of that information, and I hope people are up to date, and I hope I covered the movie well enough. The business problem I'd selected is how do we keep employees motivated, productive, and loyal? So how do we keep employees motivated, productive, and loyal? And I think, you know what, let's take it right back to the beginning of Kung Fu Panda. It's the panda in the dumpling shop, and maybe the ducks. We're going to be talking to the ducks here that are running the dumpling and noodle shop, and they'll be wondering, potentially with Po now going off and being a great Kung Fu leader, how do we keep employees motivated, productive, and loyal? So that's going to be the business problem we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at it through the frame of Kung Fu Panda, and thank you, Al, for that beautiful China sort of motivation here. And so let's go now. I might actually start with, let's start with Danette. Danette, did you want to share with us today a fact that blew your mind?
Well, everyone knows I love the brain. So I went straight to the brain when we got this particular topic. And the thing that blows my mind is that our brain is 2% of our body's mass. So it weighs somewhere between 1.3 to 1.4 kilos of our entire body weight. It's 73% approximately water, and yet it is made up of nearly 170 billion cells. So about 86 billion of those are neurons, and then slightly larger are things which are non-neuro cells, and they're called glial cells. I probably said that wrong. Now, I want to honour where I got this information. So Anne Heimerstein wrote in an article called Parts of the Brain and Their Functions on a website called Science Notes. She shared these particular facts. So I want to honour where this came from. But the fact that we have just under 170 different cells in our brain, which is only 2% of our body's mass, and yet if you think about today, we're all using our brains in different ways to be able to come up with answers in a, fantastical world with with business problems, etc. So it's a tiny part of our body's mass, yet the complexity of it is extraordinary. And I love that each of us bring a new perspective because each of those brains are programmed differently because of our life experience, our values, beliefs, etc. So that was a couple of fun facts in there, but all of them blow my mind.
I think that's a really great place to start, Danette, because it is the thing that jumps out to me, despite all the stats that you gave us, is that it's 73% water.
I know.
So it's just mostly water sloshing around in there, and then it's just being connected by a bunch of other things. It makes sense why hydrating is important then.
Yes.
But Danette, it's a fascinating concept because just the reason that water part stuck in my brain, to be honest, literally and figuratively, is that when you think of the brain, you think of the synapses, you think of the neurons, you think of the motion, but you think the thoughts are essentially the electric currents that are moving between it, but you don't think about how much of it is just a static blob of water that's essentially a pool in your brain. It's something as simple as water is really, I guess, 73% of where all these really complicated thoughts come from.
Yeah, and you think, synapses. So there's trillions of those connecting the different neurons and cells to make this thing that allows us to not only think, but, do things like sleep, regulate our emotions. So it's incredible. And as you said, to have mostly it's water is phenomenal. And the tiny amount of, it uses a large amount of our energy at any point in time. And the figures I've heard are between 20 to 25% of our energy measured through blood flow. But it's still extraordinary what it creates for such a tiny mass. And as you said, an enormous amount of it is water.
Well, I mean, do we want to potentially, Al or Graham, did you have any thoughts on that before we go to the business side of how we can link this in, or you can even steer it either way? Maybe I'll start with you, Graham.
Look, so many thoughts already. So much water. Although some of it's now being replaced by caffeine, that's probably not a bad thing. So was it 170 billion cells? Or
Yeah.
Okay. Can I maybe then just put a request out to the Magical Learning podcast audience around the world? Folks, if you happen to come across approximately 169,483,972 brain cells lying around, can you send them back here, please? Because I need them. Thank you. So, yeah, there's so much around the brain, it's not funny. I might have got that number wrong. Hang on, I just found another one. In the context of business and tying all this back into Kung Fu Panda, what a great place to start. I'm going to have to go and watch it again now. I was just thinking about one of the great sort of, it's not really a myth, I think it's a factoid, maybe, is one we don't understand the brain, really, not in its entirety, not even close, which is sort of okay. I like mystery. But we also don't really understand its potential. And yet, Danette and I were speaking to a group yesterday, and one of the things that came up in the context of how do we look after ourselves and our teams. Can we just go with KFP? Will that work? Because I'm lazy. KFP's catchier. It's another TLO. Kung Fu Panda, KFP. Sorry, Danette, you just looked really blank, and I was thinking, did I not? But just thinking in the context of the Kung Fu Panda team, and if KFP is seeking to sort of step into the very small shoes of, I need to watch the show again. Who's his boss, Jez?
I think it's Master Shifu is the.
So if Kung Fu Panda is looking to transition into that to become a master in his own right at some point, a couple of almost essential considerations. One is around how does he start to tap into and use the potential of his own brain, and equally as importantly, how does he learn more about the potential of his team and how they can use that against the forces of evil, and also potentially to improve productivity in the kitchen so he can eat more dumplings in a shorter time frame, because that will give you more energy. And discuss. Al, I'll hand over to Al because I'm pretty sure he's got something to add.
A word that I've heard you mention many, many times, Grahame, is curiosity, and that's what's coming up for me. Is I think we all assume our brain's the same as every other brain, but something's been mentioned here a few times is we're all so different. And tapping into other people's brains, it brings up things that we could never think of.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, well, I think kind of going off what you were saying there, Al and Graham, I just kind of wanted to build off that is like maybe if we take a little step back a little bit and we look at why is it that Po was so good for the Kung Fu system despite not being what they would typically look for. Perhaps we need to start looking, if we want to start filling the roles in the noodle house and dumpling house, are there people who are naturally aligned, perhaps, that we should, instead of looking at it more as a financial transaction, is there someone whose destiny is to be one of the greatest dumpling or noodle makers in the world? That's maybe the talent that you're looking for, as opposed to trying to replace someone who didn't necessarily want to work there. Is that a different factor you can kind of use to maybe keep employees motivated, productive, and loyal?
Yeah, that really fits with curiosity for me, Jez, where the things that motivate me don't necessarily motivate other people. And one thing I've noticed on the farm is having someone who loves doing the job, like crutching sheep. They're my workmate.
Did you see my face then, Al? I was like, yeah, that's not a fun task. But and Graham might be able to help with this. Robin used to talk about, there was this guy in Japan who basically loved sushi, and they created this documentary where he just mastered sushi, and that's all they did. But world famous, his motivation, his dedication. I really like that because we all do bring unique perspectives because our brain filters, every single one of our brains filters based on our own individual values, beliefs, perspectives, life experience, etc. So being able to align our people, and what I love about this is when we're looking at motivators, we're not necessarily then filtering for biases. So if we're looking at someone who's really motivated to make great dumplings, we're not going, oh, they don't fit my vision of what a dumpling maker is. A bit like Kung Fu Panda probably wouldn't have fit, most of the master's original idea of what was a great Kung Fu person. So I like that this could actually help us. Instead of looking at external features, we're looking at those internal motivators, and maybe that'll help people be less biased potentially in how they, in who they bring in, because it's not about the external features, but actually that internal desire and motivation and curiosity to learn to be better at making dumplings, even if they start off very basic, but they've got that internal motivation.
The documentary was, I'm not sure how you pronounce the first name. It was spelled Jiro. I think it was Hiro or Hiro, Dreams of Sushi. But yeah, it was amazing. He was a master sushi chef in a restaurant that seated 12 people. And he was booked out every single session for a year ahead. And he just refused to go to a bigger premise because he wouldn't then be able to serve people individually, which is what he did. I liked one of the things that came up for me around curiosity, and sort of tying this back into understanding who we have on the team, being aware of our own biases and the fact that they often subconsciously are going to filter out some thoughts that might lead us to choose somebody who on the surface doesn't necessarily look like the best fit for the particular job. And we often talk about being curious about others, which I still think is a really important and a very powerful sort of space to be in, because if you are genuinely curious about somebody else, you can't judge them. Not at the same time. We can switch in and out, but curiosity, for me anyway, sort of implies no judgment. But the other thing I was thinking is that we could probably benefit from being more curious about ourselves as well. Because I think that inward curiosity can lead us, and again, I like the idea of being inwardly curious rather than inwardly judgmental, which is often where we tend to go to the old saying about we are our own harshest critics sort of thing. But if we can flip that curiosity around to consider ourselves and how we show up and what we think about, and that can also help us identify some of the biases we might have about other people. And probably really good for our brain. It'll get some fizzy stuff going. We might be carbonating some of the water and sloshing around in our brain at the same time without, and I'm not talking about doing that by imbibing certain substances, folks. Don't do that. It got dark there all of a sudden. I'm going to stop now.
Well, speaking of it being dark, Grahame, I'm actually going to keep it dark for 1 second because you've reminded me of something I was thinking about this week, about how if bad things happen, but you're familiar with the source, it can sometimes not feel as bad. I was thinking about this. I don't know why this came into my mind, but earlier this week I was thinking about, like, imagine if you were walking down the street and Rowan Atkinson randomly slapped you in the face. Your first reaction wouldn't be to fight him. It would be curiosity because you know who he is. So you'd be stunned almost. Like, your response wouldn't be one of anger. It would be one of confusion and curiosity, only because you know who he is. But you take someone who's not him and they do the same thing, and all of a sudden, because you don't have that context, it's now an aggressive act as opposed to a confusing one. So anyway, that's to keep it dark there, Grahame, but that is also just showing how, like, we can be influenced by things just very subtly in ways that you may not even know.
It's what an awesome example. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure why that came to mind, but I'm very grateful that it did, because I instantly went to, well, hang on, is it Mr. Bean, Rowan Atkinson? Is it Johnny English, Rowan Atkinson? Is it another one? Is it? But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, getting slapped in the face by Rowan Atkinson, I probably would want to hug him on the spot just because he's Rowan Atkinson. Whereas if he were, and then I was trying to think, well, who's the opposite? Who's somebody who's really dark and portrayed it like Chopper Reed or someone like that? Sorry, Chopper. Yeah. Anyway, move on.
That's right. Well, Grahame, I might stick with you. Did you have anything you wanted to add to the, like a fun fact that blew your mind? Or it doesn't have to be fun necessarily.
Well, yes. I actually struggled. I like went back to my childhood, and there was nothing that blew my mind. Just lots of therapy. But that's okay. One that did last year, maybe, random newsletter thing that I was reading, and I sort of went down. It wasn't a YouTube thing, but it was just a website that had lots of links on it. One of them was talking about some of the largest known bodies in the universe. And no, we're not talking about me. Thank you very much. How rude. So there is a star called, UY, letters UY, Scooty, SCUTI. Anyway, so I was reading some of the stats about it, and it was saying that the diameter of that, and just tried comparing it to planet Earth, because know a little bit about that. And thinking about how long it takes to circumnavigate planet Earth in, say, an aeroplane, going at normal speed. So the diameter of this thing, not the circumference, just the diameter, is approximately 2.4 billion kilometres. Just the diameter. And they say approximately because apparently we hadn't been able to get a tape measure big enough and to get out there to do it properly. And at the time, again, just the scale, because for me anyway, we usually talk, either we talk about our sun, which is pretty big, obviously, compared to planet Earth, but this thing is like 1,700 suns. You could fit some stupid, like 10 quadrillion planet Earths inside this thing. And I was thinking, wow, so, how do people commute? If the USS Enterprise, what is it, another S on the end, if the Enterprise is not going or you haven't got a TARDIS, I mean, and I'm guessing interstate travel is probably not a thing. Anyway, that was the thing that blew my mind. It's just the sheer scale, the sheer immensity of this thing, which is also an impressively large number of light years away from us. So it might not even be there anymore.
It would be fascinating to see how long it would take to cross that diameter in like a Toyota Corolla, Foot to the floor, just see how you go. But that is fascinating. It's fascinating. I feel like once things start entering the billion mind frame of, you can't even, your brain, I think the human brain really struggles to understand what that means,
It does. Well, it did for me at the time. I could not comprehend. Again, I wasn't thinking of a Corolla, but what the hell, it's a good, reliable vehicle. Shout out to the president of Toyota. Anyway, we can edit that out later, maybe. So I just sort of taking that back to this idea of how we keep employees motivated, productive and loyal. I wonder whether there's an opportunity for us to find or help create opportunities for them to have their own mind blown about something that matters to them. What can we do? And I mean this, seriously, can we help create opportunities for our team to experience moments of awe, like genuine awe? Because I think that's, again, we know from the science, Dan was talking about brain science before, and we know how amazing that is for our brain to experience, but it's also good for the rest of our body. So I'm just curious in that context of employee engagement, motivation, productivity, etc. And I suspect, I'll stop talking now, but I suspect that if we were able to do that and our employees' brains were linking, experiencing a moment of awe with the place that they were, I think you'd be ticking some boxes around motivation, loyalty, productivity. Just my thoughts. What do you think, Al?
I'm going to the other extreme, Grahame. I'm going very small detail. And again, it's around curiosity, and it's probably just talking to other people, and also from the perspective of modelling other people. It amazes me how my bias on how I've probably perceived somebody versus asking the question to go behind. Like I've seen these great people in business, and I think you're someone special, I could never be like you. Yet when I've asked, a lot of the time it came up where nobody would put their hand up and they said, yep, I'll do it. And when they did it, they learnt, and that just led to them doing the same thing again and again. And I come along 20 years later and think, how did they possibly get there? Then there's other examples where, like, I knew a guy, he was somebody's father, and I would see him at the grandchildren's birthday parties, and we just spoke about the weather. And then, eventually he passed, and I was at his funeral, and they spoke about how he stole a train. I'm thinking, hang on, why didn't I ask him a few different things? And that sparked me to ask different people. And I met a guy recently who was very spiritual. He was a masseuse. He was becoming a breathwork teacher. He was a great listener. He had so many great qualities. And I asked him about his past. And I was really shocked. Like, he started dealing drugs at 14. There was guns involved, and his story got quite extreme. If I'd heard that story first, I probably would have never gone near him. But to see the journey he's had, has created the person he is today, and things like that just blow my mind, that things I would have labelled as bad and never gone near have created a most wonderful human being.
I love both of those perspectives. I was thinking of Grahame's fun fact as another way of looking at that for our dumpling house people is to think about the big picture. So linking their why with the big picture. And then what I love about Al's bit is that our stories create our reality. So can we create the Kung Fu Panda dumpling house story not by being the same, but having that big vision of, creating great dumplings, but then bringing in these unique stories. And I love that bit, that awareness, Al, that if he'd have told you where he started, you probably would have run away from the conversation. But because he started with something where you could sort of relate to what he was doing, and then he went backwards, you were like, oh, okay, he's taken what a lot of people would say was a bad start and actually created something really amazing. And again, I wonder in the dumpling house, if we look at the passion and what they're focused on now, rather than taking into account, where they may have stuffed up in their past. And for some people, that's the end of their opportunity because others judge them too much. Can we create this beautiful culture where it's about that curiosity and we're creating a story and a journey together, bringing in our different talents, but also our different school of hard knocks as well, because definitely Kung Fu Panda went through a lot of hard knocks in order to be able to become that amazing Kung Fu Panda as well. Anyway, they're just some of my ideas based on the great comments that have happened so far in this conversation.
Thanks for that, Danette. Amazing insights as well. And I wanted to kind of piggyback a little bit off what Grahame was saying and sort of tying things in, because my fun fact is also about space. It's one of my favorite things. I think I've mentioned it on the podcast, but I thought I'll bring it back. It's one of my favorite things to think about. It's not so much a fact as a thought experiment that led Einstein to discovering relativity, but it's what he envisioned in his mind. And I love it because it's an image that, when you think of it itself, is just an interesting image. But then when you realize how he was able to unpack how gravity operates at very high levels from it and what it means for individuals, you realize that it's just an amazingly dense bit of information. So what he envisaged in his mind back in the 1930s when he was riding around on his bicycle as a patent clerk around Germany, is he had this thought that popped into his mind, which was that someone in an elevator, if that elevator all of a sudden dropped, right? So they just said a cable got cut and it dropped. There'd be a moment, and probably a sustained moment, depending on how long the chute is, where that person is just hovering in the elevator. So they're not touching the ground, they're not touching the roof, they're moving with the elevator. And they would be experiencing zero gravity in the same way that if that elevator was just in outer space and there was no gravity playing against it, that person would experience the exact same thing. So what he was noticing is an interesting pattern that is directly related when someone's in free fall and when they're in outer space. So he was able to connect those two items and go, wow, this is actually telling me something about how space works in general, and was able to draw information out of that. And I think from that, perhaps we can look at what is a dumpling, and this may go to Grahame's thing a little bit about stepping back and even Al's idea here of not judging a book by its cover. And I think, Danette, you were kind of making this point as well, is that what if you don't view the dumpling as a dumpling, but you view it as a stepping stone in the legacy of dumplings, and that this could be an inflection point that redefines the dumpling, potentially, with someone who's passionate and wants to bring their own skills in. So perhaps it's not, the dumpling itself is not actually the item. It's not unlike this elevator, a metaphorical thing that may, if analyzed in a slightly different way, perhaps may give us deeper insights. So that's my sort of fun fact. I don't know if it's a fact, but it's a thought experiment that led to a groundbreaking theory. So I'm going to count it as a fact. But yeah, so does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I love that, Jez, because Einstein was connecting different things to come up with new ideas, and that's how we do innovation and creativity. And imagine giving everyone's brains the opportunity to say, this is part of a legacy of dumplings. Let's reimagine dumplings. Let's look at the big picture. Let's look at our journey. If I'm bringing everyone's thing together, to be able to give everyone the power to create something that maybe has not ever been imagined before. And we do it as a team. So I love the saying, we've talked about this on other podcasts, instead of no but, which is that we look one way or the other. I liked Einstein's because he was a yes and. He was using one idea and then multiplying it with another and trying to see it in different ways. And I love that idea of a metaphor because it keeps our brain, if you've got creative people and you use a metaphor, so this is like this, so the dumpling is actually not a dumpling, but it is the legacy of something extraordinary. What that does to people's brains is it's amazing. So we give everyone permission to create something extraordinary. You wouldn't have to motivate them then because they're part of something bigger than themselves and is innovative. So I'm super excited about this way of looking at it. Thanks, Jez, for bringing that.
Thank you, Danette, and great insights. And Al or Grahame, did you have any thoughts on that before we head to our final thoughts?
Just a couple of quick things. I wonder whether, and I don't know where it came from, but the idea that if you happen to be in, maybe not Einstein's elevator at the time, but an elevator that does free fall, maybe because the the security cable things failed. I remember having a ridiculous conversation with somebody once about the idea, the principle, the theory that if you could time it exactly right and you jumped into the air just as the elevator hit the bottom of the elevator shaft, would you be okay? And the short answer to that is yes, for a very, very brief point in time. After that, perhaps not so much. Can I just also, Jez, not hugely relevant, but at the same time, it sort of is. I'm reading a book called What is Real by Adam Becker, recommended by Seth Godin in one of his newsletters. And it is, I'll send you a link. If you like the whole physics Einstein stuff, it's amazing. It's been a phenomenal read about the history of physics and interestingly how incurious, not curious, a lot of physicists have been over time about the fact that there are some really big gaps in their understanding of the way things work, and there apparently is like a whole sort of area of physics where we don't understand how it works, so therefore you just don't ask questions. I think the phrase that came up in the book was shut up and compute. Just do your math, sort of stuff. But the other thing that came up around that, and Danette's point about, do we reimagine dumplings? Does Poe become a pizza baron? We just move out of dumplings altogether and do pizza instead? I don't know. But I like the idea of, again, how do we create space and maybe some, I don't know, how do we create opportunity for our team, our people, to not work so they can get on a bike and ride around the countryside safely and have some creative ideas. So there's no pressure on them to produce because we also know that we don't do both well. If I'm neck deep in work and under stress and under pressure and everything else, it's really hard to be creative. So
love that.
Sorry, I'll stop talking, but great.
I think coming up for me listening there, Jez, is what if Kung Fu Panda doesn't know how the dumpling process is run? He doesn't know what the norm is. And I saw this beautifully on the farm one year where there was a guy in our team who said, why are we doing the same thing we did last year? And it's because we've always done that. That's our system. And he said, isn't it forecast to be a drought again? I said, yeah, but And in the end, he said, shouldn't we be putting a paddock of oats in? And I gave up and I said, fine, you do all that work. It's going to be hard finding oat seed. We're going to have to set things up differently. Long story short, at the end of the year, that one paddock of oats made more money than the entire farm, just from somebody who didn't really understand the way we did things.
That's really beautiful, Alan. I think that actually, we've got to get into our final thoughts here, but maybe I'll use this as my final thoughts. I'll lead this into my own final thoughts here. Al, I've always thought that this is the beautiful balance of old people and young people, is because that's where the strengths of both of them are. Old people understand the longer patterns and seeing what has been an effective system, and young people just bring a fresh set of eyes. So it's just the interplay of those two things is always nice. And I think it's why we keep developing as a species. But let's grab some final thoughts. So, you know what? Let's start with Al. Al, did you have any final thoughts on today's conversation, the dumpling shop, and facts that blew your mind?
I'm blown away by the creativity here today. I struggle to get into Panda's workshop. it's not even a workshop, it's a kitchen. I love workshops. The thing that really stood out was Grahame talking about judging other people and that judgment of self, seeing somebody new come into the kitchen, embracing that person, understanding, what do they bring to the kitchen. That's my big takeaway for today.
Al, I mean, thanks for being on. Thanks for sharing all your stories and being the inspiration for the whole genre that we went down, and also just all the different stories you shared. I think were all great ways to condense some pretty amorphous ideas that we had floating around. So thank you very much. Great episode. Grahame, I'll throw to you. Grahame, any final thoughts on today's conversation, Poe's Dumpling House, and facts that blew your mind?
Poe's Dumpling House. Yeah, apologies, Poe, for calling you KFP. I mean, how rude. I actually really like the point you made just then about and I sort of framed it, the perspectives across generations. So, some of us old people have more experience around longer term trends, for argument's sake, but as a consequence can often miss the shorter. And younger people, not necessarily exactly the opposite, but just the different perspectives. It's really hard to leverage those, to understand them, and to identify patterns or connections between them, if you like, if we're not curious. Also really hard to get curious if we're busy all the time. So came up in the conversation we had with some people yesterday, this idea of being time poor. And I suggest if you find yourself saying to yourself that you are time poor because you're telling yourself that before you tell other people, then stop. Stop telling yourself that, because your brain will just look for evidence to back it up. I love that idea of the different perspectives across generations. And I also love the fact that it is past lunchtime here. So I'm now hungry. I'm thinking dumplings. I'm probably also going to binge Poe & Co. at some point.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Grahame, and great insights as well. I'm glad that you and I both were thinking space a little bit, space and sort of physics. We both kind of went down the science route here, so we added a little bit of that flavour.
Yep. Thanks, Jed.
No worries, thank you. And Danette, any final thoughts on today's conversation, Poe's Dumplings, and a fact that blew your mind?
So I love this. And one of the things I love about this, so our theme in June is creative thinking. And by bringing together different things, so fun facts that blow our mind, a fantastical place and a business problem, we've been able to explore a number of different perspectives. And I love that phrase, make strong, not wrong. So we're building on the different perspectives. One thing that really came to me through this, and I listened to a podcast earlier this week where Simon Sinek was talking to Steve Bartlett about AI, and he was talking about what we're going to start to see as a return to the idea of handmade and craft and things like this. And to your point of space and outer space, I also think it's, as Grahame said, creating that space to actually think about what are our gifts, our talents, and how do we bring our people together to give them that space to create stuff that is unique, that is a legacy, that is handcrafted. And I love that word craft, where we actually bring out the talents of people. What a great episode. Love this sandbox. We could talk for hours on this. So thank you, Jez. Thank you, Grahame. Thank you, Al. What a great discussion.
And thank you very much, Danette. Great insights and great condensing as well. There's great stuff. As Danette mentioned, we do have social media. If you want to check out our monthly themes, they're really, if you want daily quotes, different insights, photos of what's going on, go follow us on all social medias. We're available there, and we're always updating stuff, so you can always go check out what the team is doing between pods, which is great. To everybody that's been sharing and listening, by the time this has come out, we should be over 8,000 subscribers. So thank you, everybody who has been sharing. I hope you enjoyed this episode as well. And to everybody, like I said, that has been sharing and helping us build this audience and loving these episodes, we want to say thank you. And as always, everybody, have a magical week.